Hello, welcome back to the Dr. Kirsten Show. I'm your host, Dr. Kirsten Lauritsen, and today we are going to talk all about hormones. Yes, we're going to talk about hormone balancing. We're going to do a big overview of the basics, the things that you want to know about balancing your hormones. And then over the next few episodes, we are going to talk about some specific hormone related conditions like endometriosis, PCOS, polycystic ovarian syndrome. We're going to talk about the thyroid. We're also going to talk about low testosterone for men. So we're going to talk about all those things. And we're going to go into like specifics around each one of those coming up. So I am super excited to dive in.
Hey, just wanted to jump in here really quickly before we get into the episode. I have a new workshop coming up on November 8th, and it is called Hormone Alchemy. That's right. It's all about not just addressing the physical body and making sure that we're nourishing and supporting what's going on in the physical body with your hormones, but also making sure that we are addressing the mind, the emotions, and the spirit. I know that kind of sounds a little wonky, especially if you're new here. And here's the deal. One of the things that is the most powerful thing that I ever did for healing endometriosis, healing my migraines, as well as addressing other chronic issues that I had going on at the time. It was not just supporting the physical body, meaning doing the supplements, doing the diet things, making sure that we're eating foods that support our well-being, making sure that we're sleeping well, making sure that your gut health is doing exactly what it's supposed to be doing, and also making sure that you're supporting your liver to be able to process out those hormones and we're not getting anything backed up. All of those things are super important. And we're going to talk about all of that inside of this training. But also, the thing that made the biggest difference for me was also addressing how I was ignoring my needs and I wasn't meeting them. I wasn't setting good boundaries. I was constantly thinking about other people and making sure that they were happy, especially if it was in especially if it was at my own expense. I was constantly thinking about what other people needed, all of these things. And also, I repressed so many emotions. All of these things are so important when it comes to healing and changing our health. We have to consider all of it. And that is why this is called Hormone Alchemy, because it is going to be a workshop where I'm going to walk you through every single step to balancing your hormones, reconnecting the mind body connection, and looking for the root cause of your hormones, because your hormones are not a root cause of your symptoms. They're responding and reacting to other things. So if you're finally ready to get off of the health roller coaster, if you are ready to shift from burnout and exhaustion and feeling anxious and chronically stressed to really feeling inspired and loving your life and really ultimately creating the health that you know is possible for you, but you're just getting looped into the same kind of cycle over and over again, trying to find the next thing and the next thing to help you heal, I'm going to show you how to get off of that roller coaster and that hamster wheel. And I'm going to also show you how to self-regulate and how that has a direct impact on your hormones. And not to forget, we're also going to look at labs. We're going to look at functional labs that will actually show you what's going on with your hormones and also how we look at what's going on with your hypothalamus, your brain. We're going all the way there. You're going to get it all in this workshop, and I cannot wait to get into it. If you want a stronger immune system, if you want balanced hormones, if you want more energy, you'll fully understand how it's all connected. I can't wait. Make sure to go to the show notes and get the link to sign up and save your spot. And I cannot wait to see you there.
And so first off, when we're talking about the basics of hormones, one of the things that we want to start off with right away that is one of the most common misconceptions with hormones is that treating hormones is not a root cause approach. I'm going to say that again. Treating hormones and balancing hormones is not a root cause approach. The reason why this is because when we are looking at hormones, they are most often responding in some way to something else going on in the body, another type of stress, other imbalances, other factors that are going on in the body elsewhere. So we're going to talk about some of those today. And then you're going to see in the next few episodes some of the I'm going to show you some of the specifics to each condition. But generally speaking, if you have some kind of hormone imbalance, today you're going to get the basics of like, what do we do when I work with my clients? What do we do inside of my programs? How do we look at creating hormone balances for people? What does that typically look like? We're going to talk about that all in this episode. So for those of you who are new, my name again, Dr. Kirsten Lauritsen. I'm a functional medicine practitioner. I have a master's in human nutrition and functional medicine, and additional training in that. I have training in I'm very well trained in neurolinguistic programming as well. So I'm a master certified neurolinguistic programming coach. And what I mean by that and why that's so important is because it really helps us get to the underlying stress, subconscious factors that contribute to chronic conditions in the physical body. So when we start talking about stress, we're going to talk a lot about the mental stress and the physical stress that can contribute to all sorts of imbalances in the body, including your hormones. Also, I have a doctorate in chiropractic, and usually you might think, well, that doesn't seem like that fits in this whole scheme of things. But when we talk about chiropractic, one of the things that I look at is how do we help the body heal? Because the way at least chiropractic usually looks at it is that we don't need to necessarily put a whole lot of external things into the body. What we want to really look at is how do we help the body be able to remove any of the things that are preventing it from healing. And when we remove that interference, then the body will restore itself back to homeostasis or to health, right? So I bring it up because I think sometimes people get a little bit like weird about what we would call not allopathic medicine, but your medicine and things outside of the medical system, or alternative care, I suppose is what you could call it. But I think that it's really important because it's the lens through which I tend to see a lot of the things going on in the body. And we really want to be looking at this, especially when we're talking about hormones, we really want to be looking at this from a very holistic approach and not kind of centering in on just your hormones, which is what tends to happen. Okay, so let's take a look and let's dive in. So number one, when we're talking about hormone imbalance, one of the things that we want to look at is if there is some kind of like estrogen progesterone imbalance, and something is going or imbalance in testosterone. One of the things we want to look at is, are there any sort of thyroid dysfunction going on, right? We want to look at the thyroid because um every single cell in your body uses thyroid hormone. So if we're only looking at one thing, like we have low estrogen or low progesterone or low testosterone or imbalances in high or low in any of those, we want to be looking at what's going on in the thyroid because it's one of the things. It's kind of an upstream approach to your hormones, and then under all of, or kind of like over all of that, one of the things we want to look at is stress. So when we're looking at stress, when we're looking at, it's not just about mental stress. So like stress going on in your life, stress going like if it's a stressful job or things are going on with your family or your kids or financial stress or any of those kinds of things. But we also want to be thinking about physical stress as well. One of the things that we're going to talk about, another episode that we're going to do specifically is on amenorrhea. So when you lose your period, and how to get your period back. What can tend to happen is people will hear two things. One is either eat more, and then they'll also usually be put on some kind of hormone replacement of some kind, which is not necessarily a bad approach. But what it doesn't do is look at why the body doesn't want to have a period in the first place, right? So one of the things that we always want to think about, and this is why we bring up stress as like one of the number one things to be looking at, is that if your body is in a state of survival for so long, what does it not want to do? It doesn't want to have sex, right? It doesn't want to procreate, and so fertility is one of the things that can kind of take a hit, right? And so if it does happen for a long enough period of time, people will tend to notice that their period can become very irregular or could lose your period altogether. And this is something that I see so often with athletes specifically, because athletes, we know red S is relative energy deficiency in sport, is one of the things that can come up for both men and women. But obviously, so women are going to be the ones who notice the symptoms of losing their period, but we can also see hormone imbalances in men as a result of red S, because energy deficiencies, because the output or the stress on the body is so much higher than the input coming in. It can just create a soup of imbalances and problems. On top of that, the other thing to think about here too is that the reason why we want to talk about the thyroid is that the thyroid is incredibly sensitive to low calorie diets, to not getting enough energy in and balances. And I know that in my world, I have a lot of athletes here. So we do want to make sure that your training is being supported by your nutrition. And this also goes for not just athletes, but this also goes for parents or just people, right? People in general. But talking about parents, I know that one of the things that can tend to happen is that under eating tends to be a thing there. So whether it's just because you're so busy with your kids. I know women have a tendency to be like, I'm just going to finish whatever is on my toddler's plate, and that'll be what my breakfast is for the day. And I'm telling you, that is definitely not enough food. So these are just some things to really be thinking about as we start diving a little bit deeper into where hormone imbalances come from. And again, as you can see, I've barely talked about hormones specifically, like estrogen, progesterone, and testosterone. I've actually talked a whole lot more about nutrition. I've talked about stress. I've talked about your thyroid, which thyroid is hormones. But we've talked about a whole lot of other things going on upstream or downstream than actual hormones. And also too, I want to say here too that, stress. So in that sense, what we need to do is we need to get your nervous system out of survival, out of a fight or flight state. I have a program called Reclaim, which is essentially a nervous system. It's a nervous system rebalancing program. It is free. The link will be in the show notes. And essentially what it is designed to do is give you a lot of tools for getting at least your feet wet in what it means to rebalance and restore your nervous system to out of survival into a more parasympathetic nervous system state, which is where your rest, your digest, your creativity, and we get you out of that survival fight or flight place. So it's a 5-day deep dive program, and essentially you're going to walk away with a ton of tools. And especially too, if you also have kids, there's a whole lot of resources in there as well for helping you with them as well. And again, it all starts with you, and then you'll oftentimes see it reflected with the other people in your life mirrored back to you. So it's a really, really fun and really great program to get you started. But I will say this is that it's like it's a first step for figuring out how to rebalance your nervous system. And then from there, it's usually diving deeper into the triggers and where those are coming from and things like that. So most likely I'll put out another episode around the nervous system and what that all means and what triggers are and how emotions play into all of this. But for now, we'll leave it at that. Other things that can tend to create hormone imbalances are nutrition related. So if we are not eating enough food, if we're at a caloric deficit for far too long, this can really cause a lot of stress on your system and can lead to hormone imbalances, mostly via the thyroid, but then it can just create so much stress that your body will tend to err towards, we call this adrenal steal, which is essentially where your body will take a lot of the nutrients that would usually be going towards creating estrogen, progesterone, and testosterone, and instead are going towards creating cortisol, and then that is cycling through the system. Definitely something to be paying attention to if you are kind of living in a high stress environment or a high stress state, and just life has been stressful for a long time. It can definitely create an impact on your hormones. And if I'm also talking to like some athletes here, it can really impact your recovery. It can also impact sleep, just a lot of things that can be tied in here. And then of course they loop back in, right? It's like you get on this crazy cycle of all of these things are creating, it's not just sleep that's then being affected, but then the sleep also affects your hormones, right? So it's like this loop of things that tends to a crazy cycle, a hamster wheel of things that tends to happen. And then, it kind of just ends in this, like, I just don't really know where to start, you know? Other things too that can lead to hormone imbalances can be things like food sensitivities. One of the things that we're actually going to talk about in the endometriosis section is one of the things that has been noticed that goes along with endometriosis is a nickel allergy. I'll reference a study there, but um this tracks. So I had endometriosis, and one of the things that I was always like I could never wear, and I still really can't wear certain types of jewelry and earrings, because the nickel that's usually used in them, if it's not like a very pure gold or something like that, usually causes my ears to get all wonky. So food sensitivities, sometimes foods that are high in nickel can create some inflammation and then lead to it's just another contributor to those endometriosis symptoms. Other things too, as far as food sensitivities go, we're going to talk a little bit about this in just a little bit when we talk about the gut. But food sensitivities can lead to a little more inflammation in the GI tract, which then can lead to something called intestinal permeability or leaky gut. And then that can trigger your immune system. And then it just leads to more inflammation, more issues with the immune system, which then can lead to hormone imbalances, and it just sort of cycles its way through. Additionally, too, oftentimes when I'm talking with people around um, nutrition and in the health field, there are conditions called orthorexia, or if we have any kind of fear around eating certain foods or around food in general, or around weight gain or weight loss, or we have any sort of food related mindset things that can tend to happen, we want to be paying attention to the stress that can come from that, especially if you find yourself feeling like you are afraid of eating any kind of food because of all of the things that potentially could be in it and it could be bad for you. These are just things to just be aware of because they do add an additional mental load when it comes to the body and managing stress and those types of things as well. The other thing too to mention with low calorie diets is that when we are restricting food or we have lower calories coming in, not only can it contribute to blood sugar issues, but it can also reduce T3, which so thyroid hormone. TSH goes to the thyroid and then it produces T4 and T3. And when you have reduced T3, it can slow down your metabolism and also can mean that weight loss is a little more challenging there as well. So these are just, things to think about. But talking about blood sugar imbalances and dysregulation is also really important when it comes to your hormones because blood sugar is And insulin resistance is something that comes up a lot when we start talking about hormones. So, some of the things that you can do when we're looking at creating blood sugar balance are eating enough times throughout the day. We don't want to be skipping meals. We don't want to be going for very, very long periods of time without eating. So if you're, going over 5 hours, if you, eat breakfast and then you work and you get lost in your stuff and your work or your day, and then you all of a sudden realize that you haven't eaten and it's like 5 or 6 p.m., or you're leaving work and it's 4 p.m. and you haven't eaten all day, these are things that can really create a whole lot of issues for your blood sugar. And then also to things like we want to make sure that we're eating enough fiber. We want to make sure that we're getting enough protein. And later, we're going to talk a little bit about building muscle. And it's one of the ways that we can help not only with blood sugar balance, but we can also see some immune system regulation things from building muscle too, which is really, really cool. And those can help to reduce inflammation. So there's some in-house things that happen there that are really, really cool as well. We'll talk about that in a little bit. But other things too that you want to be just aware of is, especially for women, like you want to make sure that you are eating before you go and work out, especially if you're a person that works out in the morning. So, I know I used to work with a lot of, I still do work with a lot of athletes that will work out very early in the morning, like 5 or 6 a.m. And it almost always, comes around that people will say, well, I'm just not hungry. I don't necessarily want to eat. But especially for women, this is one thing that's really, really important that you eat before you go and train. It doesn't even have to be a lot, but you do want it to be something. Because the thing is that when it can actually increase cortisol and increase stress on your system and then affect your hormones if you are training on an empty stomach. So things to keep in mind there. Also, if you're drinking coffee and you haven't eaten food before, again, another thing that can really spike your blood sugar and start to really mess with your hormones. Um, Other things too is protein bars. I know that these are really popular and people tend to want to eat protein bars and things that will uh, just make it easier. Make it easier, right? One of the things we talk about inside of my programs is ways and things that you can look at the carbohydrates, fiber, and protein, and know whether it's going to spike your blood sugar or not. And one thing that you can do is if you total up the protein and the fiber, if the protein and the fiber totaled up is less than the amount of carbohydrates that are in there, actually it's the fiber, fat, and the protein. If those three totaled up are lower than the total carbohydrates that are in there, it's probably going to spike your blood sugar. Even things like juices and yogurts, things that typically would be very supportive for your gut, if they are higher than, 9, 10, 11 grams of sugar in there, will likely spike your blood sugar. So you want to make sure that you're getting in enough protein and enough fiber to balance it out, but also maybe, looking at foods that are a little less on the sugar standpoint, just being very mindful and aware of that. It's kind of the example of, like, if you try to eat 5, well, this is an exaggerated example, but, like, if you try to eat 2 to 3 apples, it's usually pretty hard to do that in one sitting, but you could probably eat 3 to 5 cookies or, like, several pieces of cake or something like that, and maybe eventually the sugar catches up with you and then you don't feel very good. But the point being that when you eat like an apple or an orange or those kinds of foods, it's the fiber and the nutrients that get into the gut and into the stomach that then trigger back to the body. There's a feedback loop that goes to your brain and will tell you, like, oh, we're full. We don't need to have more. So it won't spike your blood sugar as much as when you eat like cookies or cake or candy or those types of things, because they don't have the fiber that you usually get from fruits and other natural sources of sugar that usually would be there. So just things to, really be aware of. And then other nutrient based things that we want to be aware of as well is we talk so much about eating the rainbow. So different types of colorful foods that are going to be high in nutrients like vitamin C and your B vitamins and polyphenols, vitamin D, selenium, magnesium, vitamin A, E, iron, right? All of these things are going to be really, really important in balancing your hormones. So when we talk about nutrition, we want to make sure that we don't have any really big, blatant nutrient deficiencies. And I know magnesium is one of the things that tends to be very used up so much by the body. And so you want to be very careful that you're not getting deficient in magnesium. And then also, it being here in the Pacific Northwest, vitamin D is one of the things that is typically imbalanced in adults. So you want to make sure that, and it's very, very common across the board. Again, too, if we're speaking from an athlete perspective, you're going to be using, or, even I will say this, if you are in any sort of category where you may need more nutrition, so pregnancy, postpartum, any sort of like recovery, if you have a chronic health condition, your body may be needing more nutrients in order to heal. So we really want to be careful that we don't get into any sort of deficiencies, because they can just, again, do that feedback loop. We end up on that hamster wheel, and it's really, really hard to get off of it. Other things that we want to look at too would be the immune system. So, how does the immune system contribute to hormone imbalance? One of the ways that it does that is, again, looking at nutrition. So, if we have a lot of inflammatory foods and processed foods coming into the body, it can increase inflammation and then start to affect your hormones. One of the things that we'll talk about in a little bit is, or actually in the next, we're going to talk about this in the next episode when we talk about endometriosis. But endometriosis is it looks a lot like an autoimmune condition. So one of the things that we want to be careful of is that when we're looking at hormones, that we don't forget about how inflammation and the immune system are linked oftentimes. So one of the things that we definitely want to be aware of is, especially with supporting the immune system, we want to be, again, I'm going to bring us back to that reducing stress, reducing those triggers, reducing inflammation. Those are going to be really key things to helping to support your immune system, but also a lot of anti-inflammatory nutrients like vitamin A and zinc. And with these animal foods, getting these nutrients from meat is the best source. I know there's a lot of conflicting advice and information that's out there, but if you can, like regenerative farming, if you can get if you can get your meat from um, well-raised sources, that's gonna be the best. Now, I know that that's not always as available, depending on budget and where you are in the world and in the United States, but the best thing that you can do is try and get vitamin A and zinc and some of these other nutrients from animal foods. They're just gonna be your best sources. Also, again, vitamin D is gonna have really great anti-inflammatory effects. It can also help with muscle recovery, just really important nutrient, and it's so vital for your immune system. So typically I think people think that they're well within the normal range because vitamin D tests tend to say they're very wide. 30 to 100 is the like within normal range, but if your vitamin D levels on any of your labs are lower than 50 to 80 is the optimal range. If they're anywhere in or outside of that range, um, you're either deficient or you've over supplemented, and all of those can cause problems. Selenium also being one, N-acetylcysteine, curcumin, resveratrol, glutathione. All of these can have really potent effects on the body and are very good for reducing inflammation. Now, again, does that mean go and supplement and take all of these things? No. The best thing to do is try and get as much of this from food as possible, which again, eating foods that are really good, well-sourced animal foods, as well as a wide variety of fruits, vegetables, um, beans, really good healthy fats, avocados, nuts and seeds. These are all going to be areas and things where you can get a lot of these foods. Curcumin, again, as a spice, turmeric, right? So these are going to be things that you want to be looking at. And as we're talking about this immune system and headed into the next section, which is on detoxification, the other thing that we want to be really looking out for is something called xenoestrogens or xenobiotics. These are toxins that we get exposed to on a daily basis that can cause a whole lot of issues for your hormones. And I don't want to forget that lowering oxidative stress is one of the things that we want to be very aware of. On some of the panels that I run, we look at oxidative stress, and typically when I'm especially working with athletes, one of the things that we look at is oxidative stress, because being an athlete is a highly inflammatory endeavor. What typically you would think is like you're eating really healthy, you're training a lot, and you're doing all of these things, which is great. But if the load on your system is actually higher than the uh, your body can mop up all of that inflammation. If that load is a lot higher, then we can start to see a lot of problems and imbalances coming from that, including injury and difficulty recovering. And just for long-term health and long-term performance, we want to be looking at oxidative stress. Now, if you're not an athlete, same thing. If we have a lot of sources of toxins and toxicity coming through, and then we don't have enough antioxidants and anti-inflammatory foods coming in, and those nutrients, then we're potentially going to see a lot higher oxidative stress and lipid peroxides. Again, all of these things are testable. We can look and see what that looks like. But again, this is just other ways that we might be contributing to hormone imbalances with our lifestyle. So what do I mean by that? So I know that so many people have heard um, that I know, and I see it all the time on social media and on Instagram. That's like, oh, you don't need to detox. Like your liver already does that. And I've seen some very well known influencers and nutritionists say like that detoxification is dumb. You don't need to worry about it because your liver literally does that naturally for you. Great, fine, totally get it. But coming from a different perspective, if you consider how much we get exposed to on a daily basis as far as toxins go, it's it's important to pay attention to. And again, we're going to talk about this in the next episode with endometriosis, but one of the things that is possible as a possible cause of endometriosis is that um, there are some people who think that one of the reasons why some women get endometriosis is because it's a toxin that their grandmother was exposed to that then led to them having endometriosis. So again, um I just want to bring it up because I want you to think about how many different areas we can, where we can get exposed to certain things. And this is when I start talking about health, and creating health is a lifestyle. It is literally a way of living. And one of the things we look at, especially from the mindset side, because I think well, I've done this for many years and I've worked with many, 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 many people around functional medicine and around chronic illness. But one of the things that has to happen is habit change. Think about it this way, like how many people in that you may be included in this might say like, "Oh, well, I'm not very good at taking my supplements," or, "Oh, I get on the wagon and then I get off the wagon," and like, "Oh, I ate the whey for a little bit and then I just really wanted to eat the other things again," and or I'm kind of okay with exercise, but then I tend to like trail off when life gets busy, or, "Oh yeah, like I kind of do the meditation thing and the journaling thing and then I like don't have time and then I stop doing it," right? So the thing and or oh maybe I'm okay with drinking water or I'm okay with staying hydrated but then I sometimes get off the wagon and so can you see how many things are a lifestyle change that needs to happen, and we can make that so much easier when we address why it's where in the brain and in the thoughts and in the patterns it's been hard for you to maintain those habits. We can make it so much easier. um, but again, I bring that up because it's uh, creating health is a lifestyle. It is a life change. So when we're looking at xenoestrogens and xenobiotics and supporting your liver, let's talk about this is where people can tend to get a little bit overwhelmed, but we're going to talk about some of the sources of where you can start looking. One of the easiest ways that you can start reducing xenobiotics and xenoestrogens and toxins from your body is by making sure that you are removing plastics from your house. So this looks like things like glass, Tupperware. This is not drinking out of bottled water, plastic bottled water. This is looking for BPA, trying to reduce those things in your household, trying to remove plastic, cutting boards and using more wood. Again, also being aware of that sometimes this is where, you gotta be careful, but where things like, certain types of resins and things that they use to seal that wood, can be a little bit tricky, so you've gotta be kind of just being aware of those things and looking a little bit deeper at the things that you're buying. I think also too, one of the areas where, women tend to get exposed to a lot of toxins is in period products, so things like, you're trying to get as organic cotton organic cotton tampons, or pads are gonna be really, a better option, as far as your period goes. Um, Coffee can tend to be a source of mold, so making sure that you're just, paying attention to where you're getting your coffee from. Other things in areas where you could be getting exposed to toxins are candles and fragrances and things that so laundry detergents, dish soap, your soap that you wash your hands with, um, things that you spray your household with that are supposed to make it smell better for longer, right? These are all things that are chemicals that you and your family are living in and touching and breathing. Um, and it's a whole industry that is essentially there to sell you products on way to clean your home. But I'm like one of the best ways that you can clean most of your home with is vinegar and water. And then there's other cleaner companies that are out there that you can find for soap and things like that. I tend to like Castile soap, so Dr. Bronner's. There's other companies out there too that you can find that do a really good job with that. But again, just paying attention to where you're wanting things to smell good, and that can be a source of toxins too. And again, too, I'm not here saying that essential oils are always the way to go either, because depending on the way that the essential oils are produced, they may not actually have in them what you think. So again, quality, things like that is really important to be paying attention to those types of things. Well, I'm trying to think, what are some other ways that you can reduce toxins, that are like the really, the most common ones? Taking your shoes off, not bringing in, this seems like such a common one, but it is one to be very aware of, is taking your shoes off when you go into your house. So not wearing your shoes around the house is one really, really big way, an easy way of reducing toxins in your home. Um, and your cosmetics, so things that you put on your skin, lotions, your skincare, makeup, soaps, all of those kinds of things. Women are exposed to so many toxins. So many. There have been several studies that have shown that women get exposed to, like by 8 a.m., over 100 different chemicals. Um, So something to just be really, really careful of. And I don't necessarily think that there is a disconnect between the rising levels of low testosterone and all of the chemicals that are in houses as well. So this doesn't just apply to women, right? This is also thinking about men and the cleaning products and all of the things that are in the house, like just things to be looking for. If we're you also talking about deodorant, right? And things like that too. We just want to be looking at those things, and just different things that we might be getting exposed to. I think that's a pretty good list to start working on if you haven't already, things to just be looking at. But also when we think about detoxification, you also want to be supporting your body and your liver through supplements, or not just supplements, but like nutrients as well. So things like glutathione. We mentioned this for the immune system, but glutathione is a really, really powerful um, nutrient that helps the liver be able to get toxins out of the body. There's a two-phase process in the liver, and one of them is essentially designed to help um, neutralize the toxin, and then the other one is binding it to then get it out of the body. So, and those processes, like, they need so many antioxidants and nutrients. It is wild. If you look up on Google, like the two phases of detoxification in the liver, like what most likely an image will come up and you can look at it and see that there are so many nutrients that are necessary, but B vitamins, vitamin C, really powerful antioxidants, N-acetylcysteine. We talked about that, really also good for the liver or the immune system. But also like your broccoli, cauliflower family of foods, you need a bunch of these to get toxins and estrogen out of the body. They have something called CYP450 in them, which is essentially part of that first phase process to help neutralize toxins. So again, this is not just like eating broccoli once a week. This is eating broccoli, cauliflower, these kinds of foods all the time. So would it necessarily be bad to put cauliflower, like riced cauliflower in just different meals and things like that? No. Does it mean that you want to always replace carbohydrates with rice, cauliflower? No, because for some of you, and especially women, being able to have a balance of carbohydrates is a good thing. We don't always want to be going super, super low carb, but things to just be aware of. Also, foods like onions, garlic, green, black, rooibos tea. These are all really, like, I'm a big fan of matcha, just really high in antioxidants. And they are, again, they have detoxification components that are just super, super good, as well as blueberries. I know that many of you who have worked with me around nutrition are you are probably, that I say eat blueberries all of the time as much as you can. Blueberries, those really deep blue, purple, red foods are just, they're so, so, so good. Okay. I'm gonna wrap up here with just a couple more, but I wanted to make sure that we talked about and touched on your gut as another thing to be looking at when it comes to balancing hormones. We can't not talk about it. It's a upstream thing that is essential. So the gut microbiome has such an effect on not only your hormones, but also on your digestive system. So being able to actually absorb those foods that we've talked about, if we have imbalances in the microbiome, you might not be absorbing those nutrients from your foods as well as you need to and you want to. And obviously, that can lead to downstream effects. You could be eating very good food, but if your microbiome isn't necessarily supporting the absorption of those nutrients, then potentially we're going to have some problems there, right? Intestinal permeability is one of the things that can happen. Is also known as leaky gut. It's essentially where your cells in your gut are getting a little bit leaky, so they let things through the gut that are not supposed to get through, including bacteria and pathogens that can stimulate your immune system and then lead to hormone imbalances. This is one of the big causes of things like PCOS and endometriosis, things that we definitely want to be aware of is a big, big upstream thing. The other thing too here are hormone changes. So So obviously things in the gut can influence hormones, but also when there are hormone changes, those can drive changes in the gut as well. So back and forth, right? A little bit of a chicken and the egg thing happening here. But with the gut bacteria changing, one of the things that areas where we see this a lot is during pregnancy. So you know how with pregnancy, your body has a tendency to gain weight. It's supposed to do that. And one of the things that happens is with the when you get pregnant, the types of bacteria in your gut will start to change, and that can also lead to a little more insulin sensitivity. And that's a good thing. We need it to do that. It's a biological function that is essential for not only sustaining that pregnancy, but then also in the recovery in postpartum and establishing breastfeeding. It is essential. But one thing to be aware of is with that insulin sensitivity that increases, it can also increase inflammatory markers and be a little bit problematic. So this is where if you have time to be able to prepare for pregnancy, and things that you can also do through pregnancy and into postpartum are things like building muscle mass and nutrition can help so much with not only improving the immune system, but it can mitigate a little bit of those inflammatory markers by lowering inflammation, and be a little bit more of that like balancing act. And I will link a couple of studies in the show notes for you that you can take a look at there, but just things to be thinking of. And again too, like, well, I think maybe later on I'll do a podcast episode around this, but when it comes to sleep and knowing that sleep will increase, if you are not sleeping well, it will increase inflammation. Obviously for women and for people who are in the postpartum phase, that can be really, really tricky, right? Mitigating that because you have to get up for your kiddo. So then this is where keeping up that muscle mass, really doing good weight resistance training is really essential, as well as really good nutrition to help balance out some of that inflammation and lower that inflammation that comes from there. Okay, there's so much more that goes on in the gut, and one of the things we'll talk about too is like SIBO, which is bloating in the GI tract, as well as inflammatory bowel disease or IBS, and the imbalances that can happen in the GI tract that can increase inflammation out in the body. But if you've been around for a while, you know that I talk about the GI tract quite a bit. But these are just things to be aware of. Now, another thing too that I wanted to make sure that we talked about before we wrap up, we'll talk a little bit about the muscles and their effect because it's just such a really cool thing. But I also wanted to touch a little bit on the brain. So, and this is where neurolinguistic programming and NLP really comes in, and this is I see so much of the human body and health through the subconscious mind and a lens of that because so much of our physical body health is driven by our subconscious mind and the patterns that go on there. So one of the things that we don't want to miss out on, and two, when we're talking about leaky gut and intestinal permeability, is looking at boundaries, because if you have people pleasing tendencies and patterns, if you are someone that has a tendency to do a lot for everyone else and prioritize everyone else over yourself and your own needs, if you have a tendency to put work and other things above yourself and meeting your own needs, burnout, right? These are other areas where what is going on with our brain and in our mindset can lead to patterns in the human body that in the physical body that actually manifest as health problems. Because so like one of the things that I will exercises that I'll have people do is I will have them ask three questions throughout their day, which is what do I like how am I feeling right now? What do I want and what do I need? These three questions are incredibly powerful, and they can really give you an idea of how often you are putting yourself off to the side. The trick is, and this is especially talking to parents, the trick is really being able to meet your own needs in tandem with also meeting the needs of others, and not sacrificing yourself entirely for others, and for your family and other people. But I know that that doesn't just happen in isolation of families. It can happen at your job, at work. It can happen, anywhere, right? So these are just things to be aware of, because also with that, with these different patterns, they can alter our brain chemistry. They can also, with all of the stress, that, we talked about adrenal steel earlier, it can have an effect on the brain, on serotonin levels, that really can be signals that our brain is not being able to handle stress very well, and it's starting to fatigue. So these are all just, again, things we want to be aware of. In addition to, if you've had chronic illness, you know that one of the things, that is a big component, and I will say this till I die, but it is the way that we think that can really have an impact on whether or not we still have that chronic illness, right? So if you say things like, my body is broken, or if you say things like, nothing has worked for me, or nothing will ever work for me, or nothing's getting better, or if you, again, have these patterns, right, of like habits, I'm never able to actually sustain the habits that are needed, to get what I want, or people pleasing patterns, as we talked about, I'm not good at setting boundaries. All of these different ways of thinking or you're very self-critical and negative, or you have some patterns of like, I am not worthy, or I'm not enough, or your sense of self-worth and enoughness is tied to productivity and getting things done and achievements. All of these, all of these are patterns that can lead to, you know, uh, issues with hormones. And, also too, I will say this, endometriosis in particular is associated with dissociation. So trauma, things that happened in our past, if you are someone who can like highly dissociate, there is a possibility that that could also be leading to that. And these tend to be patterns of either these can also be, signs of like being rejected or abandoned, or, things like that. Okay, so these areas, these patterns that we've been talking about, these thought patterns, all of this is definitely something that I incorporate in with my private coaching and private clients, because it's on top of all of this other stuff that we are talking about here. It's a part that gets neglected and left out so often, but it is one of the most important pieces, and it's particularly why people tend to do a lot of the things and be doing a lot of the physical things, but still not getting better, is because a lot of these underlying patterns have still not been addressed. So then on top of that too, one of the things that I also offer is the Mindset for Motherhood course. And it's one of the things where inside of that, I made it for moms, because so many of these patterns come out, and it leads to a lot of overwhelm and a lot of burnout and a lot of stress as moms. And then that gets reflected and mirrored back from our kids. And it just creates this perpetuating cycle that, when we're able to help you address some of the root patterns and triggers of what's going on with your kids, then, and how you're responding and reacting to your kids, then we end up reducing stress. We end up helping you be able to have better nervous system regulation. And, it's kind of my way of getting a little bit into that root cause solutions, and through the experience of getting to the root and those major triggers of it that are hiding out in the subconscious mind. And although we aren't necessarily, and actually, I may be changing the title of this. So depending on when you come in, I might be changing the title to Functional Motherhood. So if you're listening to this way in the future and it's called that, then just so you know, that's what happened. But it's just my way of kind of getting to the root of some of these factors and these causes of health conditions, but in a way that also is very functional and very helpful for your everyday life. Okay, lastly, we're just going to dive really quickly into maintaining and building muscle to reduce inflammation. So, and Okay, so when we talk about maintaining and building muscle mass and how it reduces inflammation, not only does it help to balance your blood sugar, but and all of that happens also through eating enough fiber and protein and colorful fruits and veggies, but also one of the things is really, really cool about muscles and why you want to be doing a lot of resistance training and building muscle is that when muscles contract, they produce a couple of things. Number one is glutamine. So it produces glutamine production, which can help with activating different parts of your immune system, like neutrophils and macrophages and lymphocytes, um, which can then help to reduce inflammation and also take care of tissue injury. But then also, muscle contraction can boost something called interleukin 6, which is a cytokine that can be pro-inflammatory, but it can also have anti-inflammatory effects, which then can help with reducing inflammation that comes in not just from tissue injury and so your sport, but also can help reduce inflammation in the immune system as well. So it's really, 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 really cool. We don't want to neglect any sort of like physical training, and it's not just cardio. You want to be doing some kind of resistance training and weightlifting because it's going to help you to build muscle mass and muscle density. And then also mentioning as well that I have a couple more episodes coming out on endometriosis and PCOS, as well as low testosterone, when amenorrhea, when you lose your period, and also the thyroid. I do also have an episode with Sophie Shepard. She is with She Talks Health, and she talked so much about the thyroid and different imbalances and different patterns and things that can be associated with hypothyroidism and all of that. So I hope that this was helpful. Leave me a comment or come find me on social media if you liked this episode, and if you are looking for any of the links to any of the programs, just make sure to check out the show notes and they'll be there. All right, see you next time. Take care.